The following program does not necessarily represent the views and opinions of Reality Radio 101, its advertisers and sponsors, or its listening audience. Listener discretion is advised.
Let's ride, heading up 35. One way, we're headed at 90K. We'll over the two-lane causeway. We'll go left, it's gonna be a classy day. Kickstands down, head on over to the band stage. Kick back and listen to the band play. Whoa, whoa, let's take a ride today. Whoa, whoa, across the causeway. Rockin' day. Whoa, whoa, the classy chassis way.
Good evening and welcome to this House of Musicians with your host, singer, songwriter, and founder of the band, Inner City Outlaws, the Baritone Bear, Barry Smith, right here on Reality Radio 101. To get on board right now, send us an email. Our email addresses are thishouseofmusicians@gmail.com or instudio101@gmail.com. And now, ladies and gentlemen, right to your host of this House of Musicians, Barry Smith.
Hey, welcome, fine listeners, to this House of Musicians radio show on Reality Radio 101. We hope you enjoy the next hour with us as we do our small part to help promote musicians, bands, and venues. Gary, how are you?
I'm good and excited, very excited. We have someone that is on this show that I didn't think you'd be able to get.
Yeah, hey man, it's an absolute honor to introduce to the listener tonight Mr. Dee Long from the band Klaatu, and also lots of his own solo project stuff that we're going to touch on tonight. Absolutely amazing to have you, Dee. How are you doing this evening?
Oh, I'm doing very well, Barry. Nice to talk to you.
Well, thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to have you, my friend. Dee, let's start right at the very beginning, like I always do with the artists. How were you introduced to music when you were younger, and who were your influences, my friend?
How I was introduced to music. That's a good one. Grade 6, I got my first guitar. And I learned how to play guitar using the Mel Bay 5-minute guitar book that came with it. It was a $50 guitar for Eaton's, I believe. And the reason I got into the guitar was up at my parents' cottage one summer, the summer before, this very gorgeous young lady who came through, was a wonderful guitar player and singer. And she happened to look absolutely gorgeous with this acoustic guitar in front of her playing these beautiful folk songs, and I thought, I'm going to learn how to play guitar so I can look so gorgeous. It didn't work out quite that way. it was the way that influenced me. I had to learn how to play guitar at that point.
Yeah, no kidding, eh? So here you are now. Let's. Do you remember the first time you played in front of people?
Gee whiz, that would be in public school.
Public school on stage?
Yes, actually, it was. We thought we could play. It was quite fun, actually. We were in the auditorium at the Fairmount Public School in Scarborough, where I grew up, and we were using the school's PA for our vocals. So the actual vocals, when we sang, came out about a half a second later through the PA system. We had a drummer who had a snare drum and a single cymbal. That was it. We had a bass player, and I played guitar and sang. We had 2 guitar players, and we all plugged into the same amplifier. We only had one. And we played a bunch of Beatles and Kinks songs, and the whole school came out, and the girls all screamed their brains out, and they did the whole Beatles number. They were fainting and, running around and screaming just like the Beatles. It was fantastic, and we were terrible.
Well, just like the Beatles back then. Well, maybe not, but grade 8. That's amazing, bud. So, like, you started your recording career in 1970 in your late teens because you offered everybody a 2-sided single that you did as a part of a group called Bloodstone. Let's talk about that real quick. Right.
Yeah, the Bloodstone was my main band in high school. There's a few different ones, but it was definitely the one that we did the most touring and gigging with a lot of gigging through Northern Ontario. And we got offered this, I forget how it came about. We got offered to go into the studio, record a couple of songs. It wouldn't cost us a penny. They'd release the record. It was Greg Fitzpatrick was producing, the singer from Nucleus. I was a massive, big Nucleus fan at the time. I always have been. Mm-hmm. And it was really an amazing experience. We went in and played through a bunch of songs, and Greg came out and said, "That's the one, Toronto, that's your big hit. We're going to put it out." And they put it out. And it was a wonderful experience, and it sold, I think, about 200 copies. Hey, that's 200 more than what I sold, so good for you.
That's awesome. So now here you are, you're a teenager. You got this was when you were still a teen with Bloodstone, I'm assuming?
As a teenager, oh, yeah.
That's amazing. And then let's talk about now how you formed Klaatu, you and the fellas.
Well, John Woloschuk was the other main guy in Klaatu. We started Klaatu, the 2 of us. We had been in a band previously with the most ridiculous name of Mud Cow. Don't ask me where that comes from, but I didn't come up with the name. And we played together. Terry Draper was in the band as the drummer, and John played bass. John Woloschuk played bass. I played mostly guitar, some keyboards. We had a keyboard player as well. We were not a very great band. Our music was pretty terrible. But it didn't go very far, and it sort of fell apart. And then John was looking for a job. I took a job at my father's electronics company, manufacturing company. And John Woloschuk took a job there with me. And so we were sitting there one day soldering circuit boards together. And he turns to me and says, "I met this fellow, Terry Brown, who runs Toronto Sound Recording Studios, and he would like us to bring in our demos if you're interested and maybe get a recording contract." And I said, "Oh, wow. And you just tell me now, But and so he pulled out a sheet of paper, and here's a bunch of names. What do you think we should call ourselves? And there was Klaatu was on the list, and we both went, "Yeah, Klaatu, that's it." We went, met with Terry Brown, and well, the rest is kind of history, I guess.
Absolutely, and what a great band and some success. I want to talk. I know you touched on Terry Draper joined the band a little later on. I had the utmost honor of meeting Terry Draper in the summertime. We had him on the show, and then sent him a message if he'd like to do a live interview. Of course, we went up to Swamp Manor, his place, and to do a live interview. And he said, "Let's get on the boat." So we went out on the boat, me, the producer, Dave Clayton, myself, and my wife, and we did, I guess, an hour-long interview with Terry, which is yet to be published. It'll be coming out soon. But I did talk to Terry recently, and he told me to tell you to say hello to you.
Hi, Terry.
So talk about when Terry joined a little bit.
Yeah, well, we did go in and recorded a couple of songs. We recorded Heinous of Uranus. I don't remember the drummer's name. He was hired for the session. He was great. We did that as a single, and then we recorded Sub Rosa Subway. And that was with Whitey Glenn, who was the drummer for quite a few different Toronto bands. And what a wonderful drummer. And then we realized that, we couldn't just keep bringing in a drummer every time we wanted to record. That's crazy. So we needed a drummer. And of course, we both played with Terry Draper before. And we knew that if he took a lot of lessons, he might get good enough to play in Klaatu. So, no, kidding. Actually, he did end up taking lessons to improve, and we all did. We all took this very seriously. But then he was brought in, I believe, the third song we recorded. Which song that was, I don't remember. But after that, it was Terry Draper on everything from there on in.
Absolutely. And what a gentleman Terry is, an outstanding gentleman for sure. I want to talk to you about, so here we are now, Klaatu's up and going along. I want to talk about your first album, how that came to be.
Well, when we met with Terry Brown, he liked our demos. He said, we have a studio here that's not being used all the time. Come in when it's not being used and we'll record some music. I was quite naive at the time. I was all just thrilled looking at the studio and these flashing lights and this wonderful Neve console, and it's just fantastic, And so he said, "Come on in, and we'll do this." And we spent 3 years at his studio recording the first album. It was almost to the day when we finally sat down in the control room and listened to the final mixes of the final album. It was 3 years, almost to the day later, and it was done. 3:00 in the morning or whenever the studio wasn't being used, we would be there. Sometimes with Terry Brown, sometimes not. Steve Vaughn was the second engineer, used to help us out. And we created the whole album before, Terry Brown and Frank Davies went and shopped it. They got a deal with Capitol Records, but the album had been completed and was ready to be released. And that's pretty unusual back in the day, especially seeing as Capitol then signed us to a 3-album deal. Still did not know our names at that point. Right, sure. No, there you go. So you signed a 3-album deal. Wow, that's something to speak about. And you guys did 3 albums, correct? We actually did, there's 5 albums in total. We did the 3 with Capitol in the U.S. Yep. And then an Endangered Species, the 4th album, was their attempt to get us to get more commercial, The whole thing was to try and do what Steve Miller did with his band and went commercial from doing jazz and blues. And didn't really work out. And then so we came back, and the 5th album, Magendaling, was done in Canada with Capitol Canada paying the bill. And that was our attempt to come back and do what we did in the first album. Have fun, enjoy ourselves, do it for the music. We really did the first 2 albums were done simply for the music, not for anything else. And when it came time to release the album, it was almost a bit of a surprise to me. It was more the music than it was the actual product that we released. That was not the big deal. It was we wanted to record the songs, and we did. We got there eventually. 3 years for the first album is time.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? As a part of Klaatu, Long and other members you guys took an odd path. I mean, you guys didn't tour, you didn't do live appearances, you avoided public spotlight completely, an unheard of move for a group trying to gain public support, but somehow through purposeful elusiveness, you caused more interest in the mysterious group than sold out concerts could have. So that's absolutely amazing. Let's touch on, I got Terry's side of the story since I did have him on the show, but let's touch on the whole Beatles phenomenon thing that happened with you guys. How incredible. I want to get your side of the story on that.
Oh boy, it's such a complex and convoluted story. I mean, when we first heard about the Steve Smith article, which was written that compared us to the Beatles and said that maybe the album was the Beatles, which is a pretty big stretch to me. But when this came out, we were in London recording with London Philharmonic the second album, Hope. And so we didn't know about this until we came back from London. And when we arrived back at the Toronto Sound, my experience, the secretary, G. Chung there, she brought out a pile about 2 or 3 feet tall of photocopied articles saying that this is what's going on. The whole world thinks that you guys are the Beatles.
That's crazy.
It's insane. It was so insane that I didn't really take it seriously. None of us really understood how much this was going to affect our future at that point. We just thought, okay, so somebody thought we sounded like the Beatles. Okay, so let's get back to finishing the second album. And by the time we finished the second album, the Capitol didn't want it. they said, we're going to have to wait a few months here because the other one's taken off. So it definitely changed our path. That's for sure.
Yeah, no kidding. But what an amazing compliment. I mean, like, can it be any better? Could a band get a better compliment than, hey, these guys may be the Beatles? I mean,
well, you can look at it that way. And it, certainly, I thought it was a great compliment. But it also, I mean, if you look at a song like Little Neutrino or True Life Hero, they're definitely not Beatles songs. And then you start to think, well, maybe if this person thinks we're the Beatles, obviously they don't know what they're talking about. So don't take it too seriously. There was 2 or 3 songs that sounded very much like the Beatles, but most of it, a little bit, maybe, you know.
Yeah, and you know what? You're going to be. The music's coming from you yourself, Dee. So of course it's going to feel that way coming from you. But I can hear some Beatles stuff in some of you guys' songs, in Klaatu songs, for sure. Some of the vocals, some of the music, the instruments. Well, what a compliment for you guys to get. I mean, that's just over the moon. Good for you.
It is. I agree.
We got a couple of emails here. Dee, one says, wow, man, I love Klaatu back in the day. Very cool music. Love the name as well. Stay healthy. That's from Dan. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you. That's great.
Here's one from Kyle. Wow, Dee is a legend. Working with Terry Brown. That is amazing.
Terry Brown was the best.
Yes, no kidding. And, of course, Doug from Roller Coaster says, hi, Dee. Looking forward to tonight's show. That's Doug Robertson from the band Roller Coaster. He's listening tonight and wants to say hi. So there you go.
Great.
Yep, one more. Let's read one more from Mike. Hey, Barry, what a guest tonight. A lot of history here in Canada, working with amazing folks. Thank you. Well, thank you for that email. We appreciate it. Absolutely. Now, here's what I want to do. We talked about Klaatu for a bit. I want to play a Klaatu song. And then what we'll do is we'll move forward with a lot of your solo stuff and talk about what you've done since Klaatu. How does that sound, Dee?
Sounds great.
That's awesome, my friend. There you go. Folks, I have the amazing Dee Long on the show this evening, and we're going to listen to a Klaatu song here called Little Neutrino right here on this House of Musicians radio show on Reality Radio 101.
Across your open mind, I trace erratic lines in motion and in time. I fought a battle won to the surface of the sun, through fires on and on and on. It's only it can be me, for I myself refuse to be.
Hey, welcome back, folks. I have Dee Long on the show, Klaatu fame, and of course, a lot of his own solo stuff, which we're going to touch on here. Welcome back, Dee. Let's talk about Little Neutrino and how that came to be, my friend. What a great song.
Well, that version there is my solo version of Little Neutrino. The version that we did with Klaatu is, I believe, 9 minutes long. It's a little longer even. There's a funny story about that. Was when we were recording the original Little Neutrino, the bed track was a Terry Draper playing a kick drum with a mallet, just basically a 4-beat. And we laid down all the rest of the tracks to that. And at one point, it was 3 a.m, and we've got the master tape on backwards. Terry Draper's laying down cymbal rolls madly. And in walks Mick Jagger. He came to check out the studio. Wow. So here we are in the studio with Terry Brown's leaning over the console pushing buttons. Terry Draper's out in the studio doing cymbal rolls like crazy. And at full volume, the track is playing backwards. And he's standing there looking at the speakers and going, what the hell am I listening to? Can't imagine what he thought.
That's amazing. Now, did you get to have a beer with him or anything like that?
Not really, no. He hung out for a while and listened to what we were doing, which was, honestly, it would have been completely impossible for the average person to understand what we were doing. I'm sure he did, but yeah, and he said, oh, thank you guys, and he left. And he did come back a few days later to look at the studio. They were considering recording a Stones album there, they ended up doing the live one at, I think it was El Macombo. They did a live one instead.
Yeah.
It was around the same period. So he was there scouting out the studio. Fascinating.
Absolutely fascinating. I always ask the artist, which I'm going to ask you later on, tell me a crazy story, but you've already introduced us to us with the Mick Jagger story. That's over the moon and pretty incredible. Let's talk about some of your solo stuff now. I know we discussed earlier that you had been playing live here and there before COVID happened with a band that you call the Wild Onions, which I think is a great name. Let's talk about some of your solo stuff for a bit.
Well, one of the things that when you start making music, it's really hard to stop. I don't really have a project or a plan to make music, but I keep doing it anyway. Since one of the things I'm finding really fascinating and wonderful these days is how much you can do in your home compared to, I remember when I was doing demos for Klaatu, I was recording on a 2-track reel-to-reel with 1/4-inch tape at 7.5 IPS and covering up the erase head with a guitar slide in order to do overdubs. I mean, we've come a long way. I basically have in my home here, I have the equivalent of Air Studios, but it's all in software. It's amazing. So what I find is that as I go on, I've done, I don't know, how many albums have I done? 5 or 6 solo albums, I guess. I'd have to actually go back and look at them and count them. The last one was probably getting close to 8 years ago. So I'm currently working on some new music. It's the song and the album is going to be called Water is Magic, which is a song that my wife and I wrote together. We've done a video for it. The song is basically about trying to explain to the world that water is more important than money. I think it's obvious that we're talking about pipelines, etc. Anyway, back to doing solo music. I'll never stop. Even if nobody's listening, I'll keep at it and I'll keep putting it out there. And if nobody likes it, that's their problem. I'll keep
I think people like it, and I think people are listening. So I think you have a huge fan base, which is absolutely amazing. I got a couple more emails, but first I want to ask you about your creative writing process. Dee, I know for me, I will pick up my guitar and play a couple riffs, record it on my phone, come back to it later, maybe a couple weeks later, or record 10 riffs and come back and pick the ones I like and possibly turn them into songs. So usually my songs start with a guitar riff, but I would say 50-50, not usually, but 50-50. I would also have something to say because I think 90% of my music is to do with my life. How about your writing, your creative writing process? How do you go about writing a song, friend?
Generally speaking, what I've always done is I tend to like grooves. I like songs that have a groove. So it's not something Klaatu particularly featured in their music. But I tend to, especially these days, if I want to write a new song, I usually have an idea of what the lyric is going to be about, just a rough idea. And then I usually start out with a groove. I pull out drum loops. I pull out, drum programs.
Sure.
I have a little octopad here I bang away on, and I find a vibe and a groove and just an atmosphere that I like, and I take it from there. It's always been the way I did. Matter of fact, the song "The Heinous of Uranus," I literally sat down with the guitar, I wrote the lyrics down, and then I played the whole thing once through. I never actually thought about it. The whole song took about the same amount of time to write as it is to hear it. So once it strikes you that you're going to do this song, somehow it just sort of happens,
It sure does. Yes, it flows right on through to the end. A lot of times, that's for sure. And I'm sure you have piles of songs that are incomplete in a folder somewhere that you may return back to one day too.
You bet. Loads of them. Hundreds.
I bet you do. So here's an email from William, and William says, "Hey, can Dee tell us what it was like to record at George Martin's Air Studios in London?" And then he says, "Wow, what was that like?"
Oh, it was fantastic. It was a little bit like you could call it a dream come true, but when you're actually doing it, it just seems like really normal. I always wanted to meet one of the Beatles. They always said to my friends, I'd love to meet one. And I did at Air Studios. I got to work with George Martin on many occasions, and that's like phenomenal. We were very
Incredible.
good friends for years. But I also got to meet Paul McCartney when he came in. He came into Air Studios literally to see me, because he had been on I think it was an Australian TV show, and they played a bit of Calling Occupants to him and said, "Is this you singing?" And he said, "No, I've never heard this before." But when he got back to Air Studios, he said to George Martin, "Do you know about this band Klaatu?" And George said to him, "Yes, one of the chaps works in Studio 5. And the next day, Paul arrived at the studio and came walking in the door with a couple of bodyguards and introduced himself and said, "So you're the guy in the Beatles clone band?" And so I had to say, "Well, no, we would like the Beatles a lot." I explained all that. We had a nice conversation for a while. That was great. The day-to-day working at Air Studios was phenomenal. I mean, you walk down the hallway and Elton John's coming the other way. It's like
Amazing.
Every day there's somebody there. I worked with Duran Duran. I worked with Paul McCartney. I worked with George Martin. Many occasions I worked with so many bands I remember spending late nights, 3 a.m. with Mark Knopfler working on a Mick DeVille album that ended up being part of the soundtrack for Princess Bride. I mean, here I am, this guy from Scarborough, sitting there with a Fairlight Series 3, chatting with Mark Knopfler, and he said, asking me how I liked the guitar take he just played. And I'm going, my God, I feel a little bit like the Forrest Gump of rock and roll. I think I've met almost everybody, and I've been almost everywhere. I've actually seen Simon Le Bon in his underwear. So there you go.
What a career, Dee, man. That's amazing. Those are some just absolutely amazing stories. And don't tell anybody, but my all-time guest to have on the show would be Paul McCartney. That's not going to happen, Dee. Never say never. Yeah. But I'll tell you what, man, and my wife and I went to see him a couple of years ago in Toronto, and what a class act. The guy's a class act. There were people holding, a mother and a daughter were holding a sign up in the audience that said, "It's my birthday." What does he do? He calls them, the mother and the daughter, up on stage to stand beside the piano while he plays Hey Jude or Yesterday or one of the songs. I just can't remember which one it was. And then, of course, at the end of the show, he got the standing ovation thing. I think he did 8 or 10 more songs. I mean, the guy's just a class act, Paul McCartney. So anyway, yes. That's my dream guest. So next to you, Dee, that's my dream guest. There you go. Here's an email from Ralph B. He says, "What a story about Mick Jagger. I can only imagine what Mick Jagger was thinking. I am a new fan of Dee's now, and where can I buy his stuff?" So let's tell the listeners, Dee, where they can purchase some of your songs and whatnot.
Oh, the best place is delong.bandcamp.com. Everybody knows Bandcamp, so just put delong. in front of it, and you'll be there. Everything I've ever done as a solo artist is available there, except for a couple of very minor things. And everything that's coming soon will show up there first. So that's the best way to go. I have a website, delong.com, but it's in serious need of revamping and will be done soon. But if you really just want to check out the music, almost everything there you can listen to for free. You don't have to buy it if you don't want to. You can check it out. If you like it, you can buy it. I really appreciate people who do buy it because it helps me make more. But I also understand there's more music out there now than ever before in history. It's really hard to get noticed. So if you're in the mood, take a look, delong.bandcamp.com. Hey,
there you go, folks. And not only is it hard to get noticed, it's hard to make a buck. I mean, let's face it. I believe I've had 50 originals for 5 years online at 165 different music sites, and I might have $35 in my bank right now. So it's really, of course, we don't do it for the money, Dee. We do it for the love and the passion. We've all spent way more money than we ever had. At least me making any money at music. So I'm just speaking for myself here, but definitely a tough business this day and age. That's for sure. But here's an email from Hannah. I think we already discussed this, but I'll read the email anyway. Did these guys work with producer Terry Brown, and didn't he produce Rush?
Oh yes, actually, Rush were in the studio when we were working on our first Klaatu album. Rush were in the studio at the same time. We would be coming in when they were leaving, and I believe John Wallace-Chuck actually was the tape operator on one or two of the Rush albums, and Terry Brown was recording Rush while we were busy working around, so he was always around. They were around. Got to meet them a few times. Very nice guys, incredible talents, just amazing.
Absolutely, and I'm sure you've done lots of live gigs, correct?
Well, personally, I've done a lot of live gigs, but with Klaatu, I think we did about 13 shows or something as a tour across Canada. And that's all that I ever did was Klaatu, other than there was in 2000, when was it? I forget now when it was. There was a Klaatu convention in Toronto where we did 5 songs. That was quite a few years later. But no, with Klaatu, cool. I have not played a lot, but personally, I've played in a lot of different bands since high school, yes. Indeed. Absolutely
you have. So my question for you then is, tell me the best jam that you've ever played in or played with somebody on stage with. Or your favorite, your most favorite.
Geez, I don't know. I haven't jammed a lot on stage. Although, if I really, really, really think back a long, long, long time, I remember I used to take my Hammond B3, put it in the back of my mom's station wagon and drive down to the Global Village in Toronto Village. And I'd get there at about 1 a.m, and we'd set up the B3 and we'd jam until, noon the next day.
Wow.
That was the best jams I've ever had in my life. All the local Toronto musicians would come in, and not too many people showed up with their own B3 and Leslie. So I usually got to play quite a bit.
Absolutely. Yeah, they'd want you on every song for sure. That's incredible. Here's let's see here. This one's from Stan. Sorry, Dee. Listen, when COVID is finished, you should do a tour, not actually performing, but storytelling. What a musical life. A ton of people would just love to hear Dee speak, including me.
Gee, I have considered the idea before. I'm not a great public speaker. I find it difficult to organize my thoughts. It's much easier when you catch me off guard. But yeah, I mean, I've certainly experienced a lot. There is some possibilities in the works for a future documentary or something that would involve my work with Air Studios and other things. That has been discussed. It might happen. You never know.
You never know. That'd be fabulous. Let's talk about your band, the Wild Onions. Let's talk about them for a little bit.
Well, it's funny because when my wife and I moved to Lillooet quite a few years back, a tiny little town in BC, a really lovely place. I figured I would never meet anybody out there that was really into music too much. I really wanted to get away from the city, and so did my wife. And we did, but we immediately started meeting people who were amazing musicians, including Gary Swanepoel, who's the bass player in the Wild Onions, and Tracy Lowry, who is the lead singer. And then I also ended up living around the corner for a few years from a fellow named George Leach. I don't know if you've ever heard of George. He won a Juno a few years ago for his last album. And so here I am in a tiny little town of a few thousand people. I used to live in Toronto and then Vancouver, and then I'm meeting all these amazingly talented people. As a matter of fact, George Leach is one of the most talented guitar players I've ever met in my life. What a singer. But our little band became, for a short period, a few years there, we became the house band for Lillooet. And when there was a big show, our little band would show up. There was only 3 of us. I played keyboards and guitar. Gary Swanepoel played bass. Then Tracy sang. And all of the songs were programmed by myself. We have still a set list that lasts for about 7.5 hours without any gaps. So there's I don't know, there's good 100 songs.
That's a lot of music.
Yeah, mostly covers, a few of my solo tunes, a few Klaatu songs, anything Beatles, Jimi Hendrix, on and on. We have a lot of fun.
I bet you do. And so what's your favorite song to play on stage?
Oh, Born to Be Wild.
Amazing. Great band, Steppenwolf, for sure. We
had a live CD we released called Born to Be the Wild Onions. And our song is Born to Be Wild. Great song. It always gets people up dancing. It's a lot of fun to play.
Yeah, and what a great band Steppenwolf is. I mean, they have so many great albums. They're unbelievable. John Kay's got an amazing voice. So Dee, here's what I want to do next, my friend. I want to play one of your solo. I guess we'll call it a solo song. It's definitely something that you've done on your own. I think you did this in 2014, I believe, called Negative Muse. Would that be the right year, 2014?
Yes, I believe that's about right. That's when it was recorded, and it was released then and got quite a bit of radio play. The version I sent you earlier is a new mix reimagining slightly of it.
Well, good for you with the radio play and the amazing career that you've had. It's absolutely mind-boggling, the things that you've done. And I haven't even gotten yet to the part where I ask you, tell me an amazing story on the road or whatever, amazing rock story. But anyway, let's play, folks. I have Dee Long on the show here. We're going to play his song Negative Muse, which was released in 2014, and then we'll come back and talk about it. The song Negative Muse, and you're listening to this House of Musicians radio show right here on Reality Radio 101.
Negative Muse, won't you pay a visit? Not too much to ask now, is it? Negative Muse, all I want is one word, and I won't mind if you hurt. I hear you in my head now. You're there with me in bed now. What is it you whisper? I'll put it down on paper. Say it's not your doing, but are you worth pursuing? Can't turn you on, how could I? Can't turn you off, why should I? I love how you inspire. Now I can feel the fire. Don't care if I'm lonely. You are my one and only. Where are you? I can't see you. Where are you? I will find you. I feel you. And I hear you. Can I touch you? Do I know you're here? Negative Muse, I'll follow you so blindly. Negative Muse, please keep torturing me kindly. Your kisses have been deadly, yet I still love you madly. Never whisper never. Stay with me forever. What is it you whisper? I will put it down on paper. Down on paper.
Hey, welcome back, great listeners. We have an amazing guest tonight, Dee Long. Before we move forward, there's a few people I need to thank for making the show possible. One is Five Paddles Brewery in Whitby, Classy Chassis Motorcycles, Classy Chassis up in Lakefield Motorcycles. They really help us out. I'd like to thank Dave Go-To Clayton, who's my personal go-to guy and producer of our YouTube TV channel. Dan Parker, who's a big supporter and helps us get lots of great musicians. And last but not least, Bear Gilders, who runs our Instagram page. Thank you guys for that. Dee Long, welcome back, my friend. Negative Muse. Let's talk about that, that you recorded, wrote and recorded in 2014.
Actually, this is one of the only two songs I've ever written in my life that I collaborated with somebody on. Her name is Liz Ratz, and she runs the Klaatu Rocks Facebook page. And she sent me these lyrics quite a few years back and said, "What do you think?" And I sat down and wrote the song. She gave me the little keyboard part at the beginning, and I wrote the song from that. It's kind of the only other time I've ever collaborated that I can think of anyway in writing. I'm not very good at collaborating. Was when on the Sir Army Suit album, John Wallacechuck and I collaborated on the Silly Boys song. Don't you remember the song that's backwards? It's actually Heinous of Uranus backwards. And Terry Draper and I put the tape on the 24-track backwards and listened to it, and we copied the vocals and handed them to John Wallacechuck on a tape, and he came back with the frontwards lyrics that he'd written to that song. So John ended up getting the credit for writing the lyrics on that song, which is kind of ironic since they were my lyrics, but they were backwards. So those are the only two times in my life I've actually collaborated on a song. It's quite surprising, really.
Absolutely amazing. What kind of instruments, what kind of companies like Fender, what do you like? What's your favorite instruments to play? Brand names and maybe amplifiers or keyboards or whatever. Let's talk a bit about your instruments that you play, Dee.
Well, of course, being a guitar player, I've always been a fan of Jimi Hendrix. Just to say a little bit of a fan, a huge fan of Jimi Hendrix.
Who isn't? Yeah.
Who isn't? Especially if you're a guitar player. I mean, my favorite electric guitar is my Stratocaster, which of course was what Jimmy tended to play most of the time. And I absolutely love the one I have. It's a cheapo too. It's a Squier. If you're a guitar player and you can't afford an expensive guitar, try looking at the cheaper versions of the Fender Squier, and the Gibson also has their own version that are cheaper versions. They're the same guitars built from the same materials, only they're a third the price. Anyway, I really enjoyed that. And I don't know, when it comes to instrumentation in general, when it comes to recording on your computer, to me, Logic Pro is the DAW, as they call it, of choice. And my favorite synthesizer is my Prophet Rev 2, which I just absolutely adore. I'm looking at it right here, right now. An analog synthesizer. If you want to have a synthesizer, get yourself a nice analog, because they blow the heck out of the digital ones. I'll put it that way.
Yes, no kidding. Now comes my favorite part of besides listening to the artist's music, this is one of my favorite parts of the show. Tell me a crazy story that's happened to you, either out gigging or anywhere at all, in the studio, anything at all. Tell me a crazy, funny, not funny, sorry, let me rephrase that. Tell me a crazy story.
Yeah, there's so many, but the one that always leaps to mind, and I can't tell you the entire story because it wouldn't be appropriate, but when we were working on the Sir Army Suit album, we were at Sounds Interchange in Toronto. Terry Draper and I were working on, which song was it? The song was Mr. Manson, about Charles Manson. And we've got the tape on, and it's 2 a.m, and the door opens, and in walks Ozzy Osbourne.
Wow.
Him and Black Sabbath were recording in Studio 1. We were in Studio 2. He's there with a couple of his roadies. And they just walk in, didn't say a word, just sat down at the couch behind us and started doing certain things. And just relaxing, telling jokes we'd stop the tape and they'd start telling jokes. They were hilarious, man. It's so funny. Ozzy's actually, when you actually sit down and talk to him for a while, the guy is hilarious and as sharp as a nail. He's really quite smart. I think to some degree his persona that we know is a bit of an act. I think Ozzy's a very smart man. Anyway, he came in and sat there, and after the end, Mr. Manson, the tape would come to a stop and he would shout out really loud, "Great effing song, mate," in his British accent. And to this day, I've been trying to get Ozzy to cover the song, but make some real money that way. But
no kidding.
Well, I'd like to tell you, this is Ozzy Osbourne. I'm listening to you, Dee. I want to say I'd like to do your songs. It's great. I think it would be great.
That's dead on.
Now Dee thinks he's on the other line, Gary. Ozzy.
Right.
There you go. Dee, there's a segment of my show I like to do called, "Well, Gary, what do you think?"
I'll tell you what I think. Number one, born and raised in New York in the great U.S. of A., I wasn't really familiar with Dee's work or his bands or anything back then. But once you told me Dee was going to be on the show, I did a little research. I did a little listening, a little reading and everything. And I'm quite, taken by his experience and what he's gone through, and more importantly, the people he's worked with. It's phenomenal. So, I am a fan, and I'm going to continue to listen and to see what Dee does. And I think when COVID's over with, like your emailer said, and even as Dee has stated, if you put Dee on a tour and he's up there on a stage, on a stool, with hundreds of people out in that audience asking him questions and him giving advice and telling stories, that's a sellout crowd right there. They would buy tickets, and that he would sell out every show to do that. And I'm a fan, so thanks, Dee.
Well, thank you. That's quite a lot of confidence that you have in me.
You're welcome, sir.
Dee, I'll tell you what, I did a live interview with Terry. What a pleasant man. We had a great day. I'm going to make it out to BC when all this stuff's over. Hopefully I can hook up with you and do a live Facebook Live or a live sit-down video interview with you too, my friend.
Absolutely.
That would be awesome. Dee, what are you working on now, man? What do you got going on?
Well, again, I'm working on an album for the Water is Magic song, which is finished. But let's give you some idea where I'm at. I've got 6 songs that I've completed, and I keep coming back and remixing them because they say, "Oh, they could sound better," and then they do, and then I put them aside. And I started another song the other day, 2 days ago. I thought, I want to do a song that's a little bit like King Crimson, the way King Crimson hit me back in the day. I remember I Talked to the Wind. The King Crimson song was so beautiful. And so I thought, I'll take the same tempo. I'll get a similar kind of chord progression happening, and I'll do that. And I've come up with something I really like. And it doesn't sound anything like King Crimson. I started out in that direction, but that's not where it ended up. But actually, I'm having quite a lot of fun. It's so much fun to be able to come up with an idea and turn on the Mac and just hit a few keys, and you've got the sounds you need at your fingertips. Can you imagine what we would have done as Klaatu back in the day? I mean, we for example, on one of the songs in the Hope album, we wanted a plucked string sound. So the 3 of us got around the grand piano and we plucked the strings with guitar picks. Well, Terry Brown recorded it with several mics, properly placed for stereo. This took us hours to do. I could duplicate the same thing on my Mac with a plugin in about 30 seconds, but there you go.
Yeah, no kidding. Oh, that definitely technology's come an awful long way since back in the day. I mean, like how, and the Klaatu stuff, even for how long ago it was recorded, still sounds absolutely amazing. And as I said to Terry during the interview too, in my opinion, way ahead of its time, the band Klaatu. Absolutely, and for sure. Dee, what can I say? Thank you so much for being on my show. It was my honor. And we're going to follow your progress, and then you get another album done, and we'll get you back on the show and talk about the album. Again, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Oh, I appreciate it too, Barry. Thank you very much, Barry and Gary. We'll talk to you again soon.
You are welcome.
And to the listener, I say thank you for being here, and always dance and sing, and let the music bring your soul to the surface for all the world to see. Until next time, have a shuffle your feet kind of week, and good night. You've been listening to this House of Musicians radio show right here on Reality Radio 101.